when there's been very interesting things happen. Pandemics, right? And my first, introduction to the idea of pandemics came when the bird flu scare came through in 2005. How many remember that? And they were pushing the bird flu idea, and I was in Maine at the time, and a church way up north in Maine called me up and said, we figure if bird flu is coming, it'll probably come through our area first, and we would like to have some meaningful contribution to our community if that happens. Can you help us by getting us information on bird flu, what we can do with natural remedies for it, and put together a presentation on it and come up and give it to us? I thought, wow, okay. And so I spent 6 months of solid research on bird flu. I bought books on the historic Spanish influenza. Whenever I was out at Loma Linda doing CME, I spent my time in the library looking at the heritage part of the library as to what happened among people in 1918 in the Review and Herald and in Life and Health and old magazines. I then went to different conferences that were being held around the country on bird flu and what they expected and a lot of the interesting history. And so I put together this whole talk on bird flu. And it got to play. So then the Lord had it providentially. A physical therapist wanted to join me and do some work with me, and so she and I filmed a series of 3 videos on bird flu, and we ended up making it into a DVD set. We made 6,000 DVD sets and sent them to just about every church in our denomination in North America. And then they played it on 3ABN, our series, and that kind of got laid to rest for a while. And then here comes, this pandemic, the COVID pandemic. So we pulled a lot of that stuff out and looked at it in terms of coronavirus and what was good and what wasn't and what made sense. And so a lot of that is what we're talking about today. Also, there was the Ebola scare for a while, and we ended up looking at what aspects of our materials were pertinent to that and then which ones should be added to that. There was the swine flu that had a brief showing. But pandemics today, cause, prevention, and remedies. Do we expect pandemics to become less common or more common? Yes, more common. Wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes in diverse places, famines, and pestilences, according to Matthew 24. And what do they tell us is coming soon? The Lord's coming soon. They're signs of the times. We can expect. They attribute these pandemics to anything other than the true reason. The real reason is Jesus is coming soon, right? And so we have to be aware of that. And we haven't seen that much in the way of famines. We've certainly had wars, world wars that hit every newspaper in the world. We've had earthquakes that have rocked the world and hit every newspaper in the world. We've had pandemics now that hit every nation in the world kind of dramatically. But have we seen a worldwide famine yet? Not really. We've seen local famines, lots from like third world countries, and there's a lot of indications, with, of course, this Russian-Ukraine war tying up lots of natural resources, and they're sort of the breadbasket for a lot of the countries, Turkey, Egypt, Arabian countries, and who knows. But when you get a famine, what happens to your immune system? It goes down. You didn't feed it well. And so it's a common sequence of events. First, wars, it ties up resources, makes it so people don't grow their gardens or their wheat fields. And then you end up with shortages of food. Oftentimes the wars displace people from their natural gardening lands, and then you end up with famines. And then people are malnourished, and then you end up with pestilences. It's a sort of a common sequence. And so pandemics today. Now, when COVID came around, the biggest factor was fear. Whether you had it or not, whether you got it or not, the media was pumping fear, selling fear, using fear to drive people, to really drive public policy, to drive what was happening in hospitals. And people would just be told you have to wear a mask, and everybody donned a mask whether it was good for them or not. We'll touch on that here a bit. All you had to do is, say somebody had it and everybody would run. I went into a store one time. It was a dry goods store. In other words, they were selling cloth by the yardage and this kind of thing. Julie was looking for something. And for some reason, the lady was behind the yardage counter where she would measure out cloth. And I walked around the counter to go look at something, and she started yelling at me, "Get back, get back!" And she had this mask on, and she was frantic, and I was a threat to her life. And so, okay, I'm getting back. Sorry. And so they developed a fear of COVID scale in which they asked interesting questions to see if you were really psychologically affected by fear. A lot of interesting questions, but fear of COVID scale developed, and this was the initial validation of it. So, the force of fear. Fear is the way people seem to run these days. Forasmuch then, reading Hebrews 2:14 and 15, forasmuch then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also, Jesus Christ himself, likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. And so fear has torment, according to the Bible as well. There's no fear in love, right? Perfect love casts out fear. And so fear is the way the devil drives people. People will do things that they won't otherwise do under fear, right? I mean, you think of all the people that, I can't go see grandma in the nursing home unless I get this very questionable vaccine. Or, I can't fly. And they know they wouldn't, under normal circumstances, want that thing. A newfangled thing that nobody ever tried. And then there was people that weren't allowed in public places. And there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. Isn't that the goal? Perfect in love? Perfect in Jesus Christ. So, Luke 21 tells us the sequence. Why pestilences? Then said he unto them, nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And great earthquakes shall there be in divers places, and famines, and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. So it's in the sequence of events leading up to the second coming. So who can you trust? Yes. And here's a little snatch from the famous psalm that every oppressed and burdened and fearful person has hung on to down through the ages, Psalms 91. And this especially points to what to do in a pestilence. Because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation, there shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. Do you believe that? Did you put on a mask? How do we make sure this is really true? No plague will come nigh my dwelling? Can that be true? And if it is true, what are the conditions of seeing this promise fulfilled for me? Well, previous verses will tell you a lot about that, but really having a close relationship with the Lord and trusting in Him. You've made the Lord your refuge, right? You've made the Lord your habitation. And then you say, okay, I leave it with the Lord. Now, what does the Lord tell us? He says, use simple natural remedies. Would I be wise to just sit back and do nothing and say, the Lord will take care of me? In 1918, there was the Adventist Church with about 10 sanitariums that were tracked quite closely by Dr. Rupert, and he wrote down what happened. And then there was the Christian Scientists. What are Christian Scientists? They believe you do nothing and just trust the Lord and go to the reading room and read stuff, and He'll take care of you. What happened? The Adventists went to their sanitariums and had a very low death rate. The people who did nothing, who thought the Lord would take care of them with not doing anything, they died like everybody else. So our job is to find out what is God's simple natural remedy that helps us in a pestilence. And He's kind of given us a clue to this in Exodus. He said, if thou wilt diligently hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in His sight, and will give ear to His commandments, He says, and keep all His statutes. This would be like Moses' health laws on clean and unclean foods and so forth. Statutes. I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. And so we cooperate with the Lord. We keep the rules we know that are good for health, and we expect a blessing. And we talk about some of the rules in the terms of the 8 natural remedies, or the 8 natural doctors: air, sunlight, abstemiousness, or otherwise known as temperance, rest, exercise, proper diet, use of water, and trust in divine power. Well, how do we apply these, especially in a pandemic? What would be a way to make sure that we used them in a way that would make us healthy enough that we wouldn't get sick? So in 1918, when the Spanish influenza swept the world, it usually got about 30% of the people who were exposed to it sick, many very deathly sick. 30%. But 30% is only 30%. What about the 70%? How do you make sure you're amongst the 70% instead of the 30%? And what would make the difference? Well, we're going to tell you how to be amongst the 70%, that when the flu comes through, or the coronavirus, or the Ebola, or, hemorrhagic fever, or whatever, that you end up in those who either get none of it, or a very mild case, and don't end up in dire trouble. So let's look at each one of these. Let's start, though, by looking at a mask. Will a mask help me? Should I put on a mask? And here we have a guy in, this is a surgery mask, and he's in a surgery suite, but he's not wearing surgery clothes. And that mask doesn't really protect you. It just keeps you from coughing stuff out on other people. And certainly you don't want to be in the line of fire of coughing. Leviticus says if you get spat on by somebody that's sick, you're unclean. That's not a good thing to happen. But only sick people have the obligation, as a precaution according to Leviticus, of wearing these masks. And it's just aimed at reducing airborne particles from landing on somebody else. So there is a place for a mask for those who are sick and spreaders to stop doing that. Wearing a mask may have other negative meanings or connotations, such as signifying that you are receiving no help from the Lord, according to Micah 3:7. So that's not, that's kind of like a badge of no faith or no help from God. So the mask didn't really prove to be biblical. Now, here was a big research article done in 2021, published in Medical Hypothesis. A very good researcher went through the literature and looked at what happens when you put on a mask. And so a surgeon who spends over an hour in the operating room with one of these masks on starts to lose fine movement dexterity, starts to lose memory, starts to lose thinking ability. And this happens to surgeons who aren't trying to, avoid the pandemic, just wearing these type masks like this lady's putting on, not even the N95 face-fitting masks. So this researcher looked at all this and said, okay, what happens when I wear this mask? Well, my carbon dioxide in my blood starts going up. Is that good? No, that's not good. We call it hypercapnia, meaning high carbon dioxide. And that also spells problems for thinking difficulty. And in fact, in the operating room, when they have somebody put to sleep and they want to be able to reduce the amount of anesthetics, they just sort of slow down their breathing and make them hypercapnic, increase their carbon dioxide, and then the carbon dioxide takes over to do the anesthesia. And they can cut down on the amount of drugs they're giving them. You don't want that. Also, you wear this mask, you think your oxygen level in your blood goes up or down? It goes down. So that's not good for fighting anything. So he categorized his findings in 3 columns here. This is from his article. And so the physiological effects, the psychological effects, and the health consequences. Physiologically, up goes the carbon dioxide, down goes the oxygen. You get shortness of breath, lactic acid builds up, your pH ends up changing and goes down into more acidosis. You start getting more toxins that aren't getting blown off. You get self-contamination. I mean, the list is on here, and the bottom line, though, is immunosuppression. If you're immunosuppressed, will you get COVID easier or less easy? Easier. So the mask wasn't helpful. But this is sort of also because I'm leading into fresh air. We want lots of fresh air to boost the immune system. Okay, psychological effects, fear, mood disturbances, insomnia, blah, blah, blah. And then health consequences, everything from depression to cancer. And all documented. This is all, stuff he pulled out of the research. So this was not a good idea. And people were forced to wear these things. What is vaccination? Let's check Wikipedia. So what about vaccination? Vaccination is the administration of a vaccine to help the immune system develop immunity from a disease. Okay, that's just their preamble. Here's the real thing. Vaccines contain a microorganism or virus. Disease, right? They contain some of the disease in a weakened, live, or killed state. So either weakened or not weakened, as in live, or in a killed state. Or proteins or toxins from the organism. In stimulating the body's adaptive immunity, they help prevent sickness from an infectious disease. That's Wikipedia's line there. Not all that is true, but let's just go on. So, vaccine is taking some identifiable part of a disease and injecting it via needle into the body, stimulating the body to prepare its immune system for future encounters with the disease. That's the idea behind it. All right. Is that a good idea? Well, what is God's warning regarding exposing yourself to disease? Let's look at Leviticus. If we go to Leviticus 15, 1 to 15, God tells us that any exposure to disease defiles us. Disease is a result of sin. There wasn't disease until there was sin. Disease is part of sin. For example, if you come in contact with the body fluids of someone who is sick, you become defiled and unclean. Now, is that just, stigma, or is that something for real? In Leviticus 5, 2 to 6, and 17, it says, such defilement is considered uncleanness, is categorized as an iniquity or sin for which a blood atonement is required. Just exactly like if you, broke one of the 10 Commandments. You had to bring a lamb, spill its blood and so forth, just like it is considered a sin. Now, is sin good or bad? Bad. Is sin why Jesus had to come to this world? Yeah. Is sin what we need to be saved from? Yeah. So should we purposely sin? In the Old Testament, there was no sacrifice for presumptuous sin, only for sins of ignorance or sins accidentally committed. And so purposely sinning was, a bad thing. Psalms talks about this. Lord, keep me from presumptuous sins. In Numbers 19:20, failure to submit to the regulations for dealing with the sin of defilement from disease or from other things resulted in being cut off from the congregation. What does it mean to be cut off? Separated. Yeah, what would we call that in modern terms? Disfellowship. But it actually had a much more ominous connotation than just being, sent out of the local congregation. It was like cut off from heaven, cut off from atonement, cut off from everything. It was like, and so thus disease contamination is a serious matter. How serious? In today's terms, we would say it's a salvational issue. In other words, it's a sin. And a test of fellowship. So taking a vaccine, putting yourself in the way of harm's way by taking some disease particle, and somebody, if somebody spat on you and you were unclean, how about if I spit in a syringe and inject you with it? Is that better? And how would you decontaminate yourself from that? And so this is a big thing. I mean, I'm taking a very hard line here, aren't I? But the vaccines are not biblical. They're not according to God's word. They're not a part of God's way of keeping us from the pestilence. And so when we read in Psalms, it says, if you make the Lord your refuge and your fortress, and you trust in Him and you follow His statutes, then you can avoid the plagues. Going and doing what He said not to do, get contaminated with disease, is really thumbing your nose in His face, right? I can do it my way, God. I'll do it this other way. So the whole idea of vaccination is fraught with contradictions. Just look at what Job says. Who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? Not one. But the idea of vaccination is I'm going to shoot you with something unclean, as they just read in Wikipedia, and you'll be better off. You'll be better prepared to fight the virus. Is that true? We found out with the COVID vaccines, no. People who got the disease and died were more likely to have been vaccinated. The very idea that exposure to disease can make you healthy is an affront to God and what He said. Vaccination is deliberate defilement of your God-given body with disease in flagrant violation of God's health statutes. Simple and complete, right? So we have to figure out how we're going to be among the 70% who don't get the disease. In common childhood vaccinations. For example, receiving hepatitis B vaccine increases the odds of acquiring multiple sclerosis by 420%, lupus by 810%, and rheumatoid arthritis by 1,700%. And the research on this has been conclusive. These things, people get more sick when they get these type vaccines. What about social distancing? I want to touch on social distancing because this is also an interesting factor. We were in Idaho when the pandemic really took off, and immediately they closed all our churches. That was pretty surprising to me. When I did all my research on the pandemic of 1918, and I did the research in Maine, I was looking at cities in Maine. I was looking at Lewiston and Auburn, Maine. And it just so happened that those cities had a lot of churches that said, no, government, you can't close us. We have not only biblical mandate to stay open, but we have First Amendment rights. And so there was this long historical list of arguments back and forth that went through the newspapers. The government saying, you guys are a hazard to us. You go to that church, you hug and kiss and exchange. They overdid it, but anyway, the government overplayed what the people were doing in church just to try to make a point. And the people came back and said, well, we went to church because we were told that we should, and that God is going to take care of us. And see, God instituted social distancing or quarantine for the sick? Yes. For the well? No. So if you got sick, you are supposed to stay home. If you're not sick, well, not for the healthy, for those who are well, forcing them to stay home, limiting their shopping, or telling them to skip church. You can go, in America, you could go to the casino, but you couldn't go to church. You could go to the bar, but you couldn't go to church. You could go to Walmart, but you couldn't go to church. So one church said, okay, we're renting the casino. The government came after them and closed the casino. How's that for evidence of a big agenda? Yeah. All right. Anyway, for those who are well, the Bible clearly states how to conduct themselves during a pandemic, if you're well. Okay, what do I do? First of all, 2 Chronicles 20, you are to go to the meeting place to pray that God will avert the pestilence. That's your job. That's according to the written record. So if you know there's a pestilence, you come to church, you all get together, because where 2 or 3 are together and they agree, does God act? Is he able to act more fully? Yes. You're supposed to come to church and pray for the event. If you humble yourself and pray, God promises to hear and answer your prayers and avert the pestilence. 2 Chronicles 7. That's the one where he says, if I send pestilence, and if my people, which are called by my name, and they pray, he'll hear. Yeah. And so, and then, this is only if you're well. If you're sick, you're required to stay home. And that's Numbers 5, 2, and 3 about quarantine. Now, very interesting. Part of staying away, getting free from sickness or avoiding sickness is doing as we read earlier, following God's health statutes. Obedience to his commands regarding health as well as morals is key to avoiding sickness, and also securing his healing should you get sick. And we already quoted that text, Exodus 15:26 earlier. But you see, part of those laws are Moses' health laws in Leviticus there about not contaminating yourself with disease. So also the laws in Leviticus are about assembling. So in Leviticus 23:3, one of the commands that you should be keeping so that you don't get the diseases that he brought up on the Egyptians is the command to keep the Sabbath and make it a holy convocation. And this is in definitely Leviticus 23:3, comes from the 4th commandment, especially you are supposed to go to the synagogue or church. In Hebrews, this is clearly spelled out in Hebrews 10:25, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, so much the more as ye see the day approaching. The Greek word here for assembling ourselves together is episynagogue. What's episynagogue? Well, you've heard of epicenter, like where the earthquake hits. Episynagogue is where the synagogue is. So you're supposed to come to synagogue. It doesn't just mean you're supposed to gather in your house or out in the woods somewhere. You're supposed to come to church. And this is like saying at the epicenter, yeah, meaning synagogue or church. And so, well, what do I do if there's a pandemic and I'm worried? So does the Bible give us any counsel on how to meet safely? Yes, first, the sick are to stay quarantined, as we already mentioned. But second, the elders should gather ahead of time at the church to pray that nobody will be spreading the disease. The priests in the Old Testament were to do this before a holy convocation. Pray that no pestilence comes when everybody gathers. So there's our mandate, what to do in time of pestilence. And it says so much the more as you see the day approaching. Do you think we're getting farther away from the second coming or closer? So should we be more apt to show up at church or less apt to show up at church? More apt. And especially if we see a pandemic, right? And so where's the safest place to be when there's a pandemic? At church. Exactly. And so And we quoted earlier that it's a sign of Christ's second coming. Well, what's the fate of fear? The fate of fear. Death? What if fear overwhelms me and I'm afraid to follow God's command to assemble during a pestilence and I stay home, as many people did? Well, so when we were in Idaho, they closed our churches. Our church was the two churches that we sort of worked with there, doing some health stuff and also attending. Both were kind of like, we shouldn't be closed. But one of them said, we're too afraid to open. The other one said, okay, we're going to bring the preacher in and a minimal crew, and we're going to do Zoom programs for everybody. So they did. We said, wow, you're going to do Zoom programs? You need an audience. We showed up. And so we showed up anyway. But what happens if you stay home? According to the Bible, you're more likely to get the pestilence if you stay home, according to Exodus 5:3 and Zechariah 14:16 and 19. Exodus 5:3 is Moses goes into Pharaoh, and he says, look, Pharaoh, we need to go out into the wilderness, and we need to have a convocation. God has called us to do this. If we don't do that, we will get a pestilence. So staying home when you're supposed to be in church, you're more likely to get the pestilence. Yeah? And, right, so for God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. This really is a test of whether or not you believe what God says or not. Yeah? And I know here in Canada you had some preachers that opened their churches and went to jail. And in America we had some quite outspoken preachers that suffered similarly. Some of them got away with it and said some interesting things. All right, let's get down to more of the nuts and bolts of the science behind fighting a pandemic. Lord Palmerston of England, Premier of England, was petitioned by the Scottish clergy. They wanted him to set up a day of prayer and fasting for the pestilence. Well, because he didn't want to mix church and state, as is wise, he told them, if you would just take care of the poor, feed everybody well, follow the health laws, then, you probably won't need to pray. And if you don't do these, the Lord's not going to listen to your prayers anyway. Very interesting. And he probably wasn't very popular with the Scottish clergy for that, but very true. And so when we think we want to pray, we want to also see our prayers fulfilled by following good health habits. So let's get back to the 8 natural doctors. And the solution, we ask to be kept from a pestilence that walketh in darkness. What does it mean, the pestilence walks in darkness? You ever seen a pestilence that was more, what would we say, kept sort of mysterious than COVID? I mean, what was supposed to be done and what wasn't supposed to be done, whether vaccines were good or whether they were bad, whether or not you should, wear a mask or not, all kinds of things that, and then hospitals that wouldn't see patients and hospitals that gave things that made patients worse and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, walks in darkness. That is stalking with such power through the world. We are then to cooperate with God, observing the laws of life and health. Having done all that we possibly can, we're to keep asking in faith for health and strength. We are then to eat that food which will preserve the health of the body. God gives us no encouragement that He will do for us that which we can do for ourselves. And so we need to know how to meet a pestilence when the next one shows up. Sorry? Yeah, right. We can't be doing things that are destroying our health and then praying that God will help us. Okay, here's a good scientific article on what happens when you get infected with a virus. I guess this one's easier to point out. And so the virus's numbers is over here on this side. Across the bottom is time. Anytime you get hit with a virus, the virus goes into your cells, makes your cell into a virus factory and starts making viruses, and viruses start coming out of that cell. A few viruses go into the cell, out come thousands. Lots of virus, and the cell dies often. And so initially, there's an exponential increase in growth of viruses. The first alarm that goes off in your body is set off by natural killer cells, and they produce interferon, your body's natural antiviral substance. And when the natural killer cells start to work, they bring the number of viruses in your blood, in your system, down. Quite quickly, but not all the way. They bring it about halfway down. At that point, another part of your immune system needs to be intact to bring the viruses down totally to nothing, and that is B cells or lymphocytes and their product, which is an antibody called IgA, immunoglobulin A. And so if your natural killer cells are working good, you'll fight the virus. If your natural killer cells are able to produce interferon, that fights the virus. If your B cells are working, then you are good. If your B cells are making IgA, it's good. If, at this first thing, natural killer cells don't work, well, at least laboratory animals, they die. If all you have is natural killer cells and interferon, and you don't have B cells and IgA, then the viruses will take off again, and in laboratory animals anyway, they die. So you have to have all parts of your immune system intact and working well to fight a viral infection. So what we want to do is look at those lifestyle factors that will boost the immune system in the area of natural killer cells, interferon, B cells, and IgA, and how that will help us fight a virus, a viral illness. So let's start with pure air. Pure air that isn't filled with toxins, doesn't have, ozone and sulfur dioxide in it, doesn't have pollution from factories, doesn't have a lot of exhaust in it from cars. And when you are in a situation where you have lots of pollution, your ability to fight the virus is very much compromised. You're much more likely to get the virus and much more likely to die. And so you want to have pure air. Living in a city, they put sensors on high school students in New York City. They found out when they walked through the city, they had more than acceptable levels of toxins coming in their bodies in the air. When they went in their houses, those levels went up by 3 times. The houses were more toxic than the outdoor air. It wasn't until people went outside of town that their toxic levels of everything from aldehydes and formaldehyde and products of combustion of cars and other pollutants were low enough to be acceptable. Being out in the country is better than being indoors or in the city. Abraham lived in a tent, right? A lot of the people in the Middle East in the old days lived outdoors. And outdoors is much healthier. And if you are working indoors all day, they did a study on a group of people who worked in an office. It was an old office building. They decided to check everybody's blood to see how much toxins they had in their blood. Then they remodeled their offices and sent them back in the offices. Then they checked their blood again. Lo and behold, the toxins went way up and their natural killer cell activity went way down. What kind of toxins? Formaldehyde, chloral hydrocarbons, all these, organic solvents. And so it came from carpets and draperies and insulation board and paint and new chairs and plastic, plants and whatever they put in there. And so when you work with all these modern, fancy building supplies, you end up really infecting yourself or contaminating yourself or poisoning yourself. And so it's good to get outdoors but not in really old buildings. When you're in really old buildings, what do you find? Oh boy, mold will wipe out your immune system. I have a whole talk on mold if you want to look at it on our website. But mold is a huge factor in modern society that leads to all kinds of diseases, and we live in sort of humid area down where we are. Where we go, we have to drive about an hour to get to a big town to do our shopping. And one of those towns is Mountain Home, Arkansas. We drive by an area where there's probably 5 houses that have been abandoned due to mold on our trip going down there. And when you're in these moldy houses or houses that have had mold, that wipes out your natural killer cells. They're unable to fight disease. They fight cancer, they fight pandemics, they fight viruses. And when you have a moldy premises, you're much more likely to get upper respiratory tract infections, for example, and your symptoms are going to be much worse. And I've had people who, they just couldn't get well, and they couldn't get well, and so I said, well, where do you live? What's your house like? Oh, yeah, it had mold. Well, what do I do? I said, well, go down to the big box store camping world or whatever and buy yourself a tent and move in the backyard. And yeah, and why do I say that? Well, it's been proven that that's very healthy. So if you get out in the fresh air, you're outdoors where there's, freshly, we had rain over the weekend, right? When you're out there after the rain or mist or dew or by a body of water, there's a lot more negative ions in the air. Those negative ions stimulate your immune system. They get your natural killer cells going more. Taking walks outdoors in the fresh air, very helpful. Getting away from indoor air loses its negative charge. Outdoor air with the negative ions helps your body better to fight viruses and disease. So having a job where you're outdoors. If you're indoors all the time with air conditioning, much more likely to get sick. Getting outdoors in the fresh air, even if it's too hot or too cold, just dressing for the weather, you're much less likely to get, for example, COVID-19. People with a greater outdoor way of life have suffered far less COVID-19 impact, according to the studies. Open air physical activity occupations are protective, while artificial air-conditioned environments increase the likelihood of sickness because of the dysfunction of your immune system. So in 1918, we had a massive amount of people coming into the hospitals. It was overwhelming the hospitals, so much so that they ran out of hospital beds everywhere. Well, we can't turn the people away, so they had the military bring their tents over and pitch them on the grounds of the hospital. So even if you couldn't get a hospital bed, they had a bed for you out in the tent. Guess who survived the pandemic much better? The people out in the tents. So much so that those became the prized beds. Those became the coveted places to be. They called it the fresh air, what was it? They gave it a name, fresh air therapy. Nurses, this is a 1918 picture. Nurses care for victims of Spanish influenza epidemic outdoors amidst canvas tents during an outdoor fresh air cure. Outdoor fresh air cure is what they called it. And so if you're really sick with a disease like that, being outdoors more than indoors is very helpful. There's the fresh air, but there's also, what we're going to get to here in a minute, is the sunlight. Now, being in this area of the country where there's pine trees is also very beneficial because pine needles are putting off a pine oil and helps boost your immune system. There's alpha and beta pinene components of that pine fragrance that help keep the COVID, in this case COVID, from going into the cells with the spike protein. And so you are very much benefited by being where there's lots of trees. In fact, we've been told that it's better to, if you're going to build a hospital or sanitarium and there's a lot of trees, it's better to move where you're going to put that building than to cut down the trees because the trees are so important to the health. And so if you live in an area like this with lots of trees, you benefit. You can use pine oil as well if you like. Some people like the essential oil. When we had a lot of COVID patients, and even if we got it, we put pine oil in a diffuser. And that was very, very beneficial. We did pine needle tea as well. take the pine needles. And I mean, there was a lot of discussion which pine needles were good and which ones were bad. I didn't care. I just took the ones that were on the trees near me. They didn't turn out to be, according to everybody, to be the best, but they were still good. And so I was using yellow pine. And around here you have a lot of fir and so forth, and pine.
I did the same thing, but I maybe, if it was the kind of pine tree that I took it from, like I know now they say the white pine, but I maybe didn't use the right dosage or I had too much, but it made me purge.
Yeah, it was good, wasn't
I
it?
don't know if you did that happen to you too.
It was great. Yeah, well, yeah. What do you mean by purge?
I vomited like crazy.
Really? No. For us, the yellow pine worked great. All the symptoms, it cut down on symptoms. It made it. Yeah, interesting. I did try some cedar, and that was too strong. We have eastern cedar, I think, is down there. All right. Some people use pine essential oil. I guess I talked about it. Citrus. Citrus, especially lemon, but citrus helps fight viruses. And you can use the essential oil as well, or oil extract, and that will help reduce viruses in the air. I've had friends that would take a little bottle of essential oil and string it around their neck and put a wick in the top of it, and constantly having a bit of essential oil in the air around them, and they felt that was very beneficial. What the benefit of lemon is that it has several phytochemicals that are beneficial that help fight the viruses. Hesperidin, D-leminin, which was very good for inhibiting the coronavirus. And so you get a lot of this from the lemon skin. So if you can use the whole lemon. I had people that I would tell them, they wanted to avoid the virus and so forth. Well, what can I do? I had them make a sort of a smoothie out of lemon and onion. So they would put a whole organic lemon in the blender and half of an onion, blend it up, and the lemon is softened and made more mild by the onion, and the onion is made more mild by the lemon. We use this for asthmatics, very good for asthma. Anyway, we had people doing that, and they found that very, very beneficial. Other essential oils, juniper oil, sage oil, definitely have activity against coronavirus. There's the sage. And so one day I thought, okay, I wonder what I could go down to the supermarket and just buy as seasonings that would be helpful for say, COVID. And I looked around, and yes, there was sage, and there was rosemary. That's got alpha and beta pinene. Of course, there's garlic, and there's turmeric. Those help with inflammation, and garlic helps fight things. Some places have lemon peel as a powder that's used in some recipes, and so, or lemon extract. So I thought, okay, that would be useful. And it was interesting to look around and see what was available. And sage is also, you could make it into tea. You could put it in food. And that's, of course, what usually people do with their sage. And so different things are available in a local supermarket under the heading of spices that are also good for helping with diseases. All right, sunlight. And certainly we talk about the benefits of sunlight for vitamin D, but there's other benefits of sunlight as well. Sunlight, let's just talk about what happens when a virus hits the cell. Now, especially for pandemic viruses like the 1918 Spanish influenza and COVID, was that when they got in the cell, they shut off the cell's natural defenses. They also made it so you didn't like to eat food. You lost your appetite. And so this is what the virus does to you. It makes it so your natural defenses are cut down, you don't produce interferon, and you don't have an appetite. But when the viruses did this, if you got lots of sunlight, or were used to getting lots of sunlight, the sunlight disabled the virus's ability to suppress the production of interferon. And so sun is very helpful for fighting the effects that viruses have through their toxins on your body. Sunlight also produces vitamin D, and that certainly seemed to be beneficial. Studies out in California where they gave half the patients in a mental hospital vitamin D. That half of patients got half as many respiratory tract infections as the other half of the hospital. So that was sort of the initial study that set off the big thing that everybody has to take vitamin D now. Well, really you want to get it from the sun because you get more from the sun than just vitamin D. Vitamin D is cholecalciferol, but that's a costeroid. If you get the sun on your skin, you get a lot of costeroids, not just vitamin D. And so just taking vitamin D as a substitute for sun doesn't cover all the bases. And so you want to get your vitamin D from the sun, and it helps if you have a high vitamin D to have less inflammation, otherwise known as cytokine storm. And so people that had more vitamin D on board did better in the pandemic. It stimulated the natural killer cells. And so 2/3 fewer COVID infections with people who had high vitamin D levels, half as many cases that became severe for those who had high vitamin D levels, and 1/3 the death rate. And so having plenty of vitamin D, and I'm saying especially from the sun, was hugely beneficial. Does that make sense? Yeah, definitely. All right. Also, sunlight itself kills viruses. They don't tend to survive well under UVB light. And if you go in a hospital, sometimes you'll see blue light shining at the ceiling. They don't usually let them shine directly at you because they're kind of hard on your macula, causing macular degeneration. But they shine them up on the ceiling. In the operating rooms, oftentimes we'll have those lights because it kills the viruses, and direct sunlight will do that as well. Exposure to natural sunlight for 1 hour a day was an experiment they did. When I read that experiment, I said, wait a minute, why'd they have to send people out for 1 hour a day? That means people don't get 1 hour of sunlight in a whole day. But this was an experiment and a study to get them out for 1 hour. People become such mushrooms, they hide inside all the time, right? But anyway, when they put people out in the sunlight for 1 hour a day for 12 days, it significantly boosted their immune system, and the effect lasted for 2 weeks after the end of the study. That's how much benefit there is from sunlight, getting out there in the sun. And so if we can get out there more, we're benefited. Rest. And so we'll start out talking about the problem of a lack of rest, otherwise known as insomnia. People with insomnia, their natural killer cells are not functioning as well. People with insomnia are more likely to get their pandemic disease. And so how do I fight insomnia? How do I get to sleep? How do I make sure I sleep? Well, most of the time, insomnia is a result of stress, psychological stress. In fact, compared to taking any of the either over-the-counter or prescription sleep aids, getting cognitive behavior therapy for stress was way more effective. So the first thing is dealing with stress. But then after that, things that definitely help is not eating supper. One of the biggest causes of, at least physiological causes of a lack of sleep is eating in the evening, eating too close to bedtime, eating things that are too heavy, eating vegetables in the evening instead of fruit, eating heavy things in the evening. Eat 2 meals a day and much more likely to sleep. With people who have chronic insomnia is to get moderate exercise, like taking a 45-minute walk in the evening. And that helps with sleep. And then taking a warm bath can also help with sleep. Just a few very interesting things. Now, in this modern age, one of the things that disrupts people's sleep is being on an electronic device with a screen in the afternoon and evening. When you get that blue light in your eyes, especially to have problems. This thing's messing up again. Last time I moved it forward and it worked a little better. Looks like the battery's good. That's probably just the position round back at me. All right. Now, sleep deprivation. They took a bunch of mice and they decided they're going to infect them with the pandemic influenza. But the two groups of mice, one group was sleep deprived for 7 hours one night. Instead of getting to sleep 8 hours, they only slept 7 hours. Then, when they gave all the mice the flu as a virus, the ones that had been sleep deprived were much more likely to catch the flu than those. In fact, the ones that got their sleep didn't get much of the flu at all, but the ones that were sleep deprived got the flu. And so you might try all kinds of things to try to keep from getting the flu, but if you're not following all the good health habits, good practices, then you're more likely to get the sickness. You can't fudge on the simple natural remedies on the natural doctors, or you end up with the disease. Now, sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation can be either not getting enough hours, or it can be getting to bed too late. So we say 2 hours of sleep before midnight is worth 4 hours after midnight. People who get to bed by 9 o'clock have much better melatonin levels in their body than those that get to bed at 11. It's a big difference. People who go to bed at 11, their melatonin will rise, but its timing and its amount will be unpredictable. And it won't be as sufficient as somebody who gets to bed at, say, 9 o'clock. And, well, here I got my one on melatonin with his device. He's in bed with his device, looking at it. That's going to mess with the melatonin. You're going to have more neuroinflammation as a result. Psychological stress causes neuroinflammation, more likely to get diseases. Now, there's more than just rest from sleep. There's rest as in peace, or in this case, they did a study on people meditating. People who meditated had a much stronger response to viruses, a better immune system than those who didn't. So reading your Bible and meditating on it is going to help your immune system. And a study was done down in, I think it was Phoenix, where they were looking at antioxidants in people's bloodstream. And lo and behold, they came across a group of people that had higher antioxidants. And they discovered that they were Seventh-day Adventists. And then they looked at the group of Seventh-day Adventists, and those that were on a good vegetarian diet had even higher levels. But I was interested in the ones who probably weren't necessarily on a good diet, but they were keeping the seventh day and getting rest, and they had higher antioxidants just from, well, following God's plan of meeting together, not forsaking assembling, and spending time with others in church. All right, exercise. Let's talk about exercise. And how many like to exercise? Nobody? Oh, here's a couple. Maybe we better stand up and stretch. Let's do a little exercise. Everybody stand up and let's just, you ever heard of the coconut exercise? Let's do the coconut exercise. Here's the way the coconut exercise works. So we go, C. Everybody go like that. C. O. C. O. And then you make an N. And then U. And then T. Okay, let's do it quicker, all right? C. O. C. O. N. U. T. All right, you just did the coconut exercise. Okay, we're all set. Back awake again, huh? Now, so exercise helps keep you limber. Exercise helps keep you strong. Exercise helps your immune system. It boosts your ability to fight viruses. People who do moderate exercise, emphasizing moderate. Why do I emphasize moderate? If you decide you're going to do a marathon, that wipes out your immune system. I had a classmate in medical school contacted me not too long ago. I saw him at summer camp. He says, I got a problem. I'm having all these colds and flus ever since I started marathoning. What do I do? Yeah. And in fact, I had a friend in Loma Linda, and he decided to marathon, and he got leukemia. Well, he went and got over his leukemia through not natural means, but anyway, he went back to marathoning, and within a year he was dead. His leukemia came back. Over-exercise is not helpful. Stressful exercise doesn't help. Students that go off for basketball camp and work out hard, and their immune systems don't go up, don't improve. But people who do moderate exercise, especially outdoors in fresh air and sunshine, that boosts their immune system for viruses. Patients who consistently met the physical activity guidelines were 2.5 times less likely to die of COVID. And at least in the United States, we have these physical health guidelines, often talked about as the president's physical health guidelines. Anyway, being fit. Remember when we talked about cancer, people who were fit had half the, or 55% less death rate from cancer. Well, same thing for COVID. It has to do with boosting your natural killer cells, which fight both cancer and viruses. Outdoor exercise has positive effects on the lungs and vascular endothelial function, especially for fighting COVID-19 or getting over it. So, is jumping in bed and laying there forever until you get over your COVID or whatever pandemic the best thing to do? No. Inactivity is, if you lay there long enough, you'll die, right? In fact, they took a bunch of young men in one study, and they put them in hospital beds, sent them to the hospital just to lay there for 2 weeks. At about 2 weeks, they said, we got to get you out of here. You are going to get sick. Their inflammation in their bodies went up. All kinds of things were going bad. And so just laying around when you're sick is just a way to get sicker. You don't want to overdo it, but getting outdoors and walking around and getting the sunshine and fresh air, and because otherwise, it's not going to be good. All right, what about tight clothing? When I'm exercising, I don't want tight clothing. Anything that restricts blood flow, anything that stops the free circulation of blood is a problem. Now, in our cancer lecture, we talked about the contribution of bras to breast cancer because you're suppressing blood flow. You're creating unnatural heat as well. And so the dress should be loose-fitting. It should have good covering for arms and legs, and it should allow for free expansion of the lungs, no tight bands. When you have a tight band around the waist, it changes the blood flow in your abdominal wall. It changes the blood flow in your intestines. It raises the temperature in your rectum. It makes it so your transition of food through the intestines is slowed down. It creates overgrowth of bacteria. It makes it so you have a lot more toxins coming out of the bacteria, and your immune system goes down. And so tight clothing contributes to poor circulation. So, rather than a belt, wear suspenders, and that's a principle is hanging your clothes more from your shoulders than from your hips. And by the same token, cold limbs. When your arms and legs are cold, then your blood is squeezed by the blood vessels back to your chest, abdomen, and pelvis, to your trunk. When the blood all gets to your trunk, there's not enough room for it. It's like rush hour traffic in Vancouver. It's like, okay, we can't move. And the inflammation goes up. When the inflammation goes up, then your immune system goes down, much more likely to catch one of these viruses. What you want is even clothing. So, long johns, leggings, base layer, warm clothing during the winter, keeping the arms and legs always as much clothed as your chest. In fact, it's, theoretically, it would be better to wear something where there was more clothing on your arms and legs than your chest and abdomen and pelvis. And there's a lot of things that happen. Cold ankles, men have more prostate problems. Cold arms, more likely to get a nosebleed because the blood is all congested to the central axis. And I had one friend, he was always getting nosebleeds. I went over to his house one day. His nose was just spouting blood. I helped stuff his nose with cotton. What do I do? What do I do? I told him to start wearing long sleeves. 2 years later, I saw him And he came up to me and he says, "Look at me, what do you see?" And I said, "I see," and his name was Mike. I said, "I see Mike." And he says, "Well, yes, but what am I wearing?" I says, "Oh, you're wearing a long sleeve shirt." He says, "I haven't had a nosebleed in 2 years. And I always wear long sleeve shirts." Makes that big a difference. Now let's talk about proper diet. This is a larger section with a lot more detail. What's he got in his hand? Fruit, an apple. What do we say? An apple a day keeps the doctor away? Yeah, well, so fresh fruits and vegetables, that's what you want. They're nutrient dense. They have a lot more nutrients than cooked food, than processed food, than extracted food. And they're anti-inflammatory, they're tumor protective, they boost the immune system. This is where you're going to get your best bet. When I went to Academy, our assistant boys dean decided to go on a raw food diet, a serious raw food diet. When we would be at the table eating whatever, he had a bowl that was the size of a plate with like a 5-centimeter side on it, and he'd have a heaping salad in there. Now, you imagine a bunch of Academy kids seeing somebody doing that much different. We teased him. Well, he was a good sport. He liked to tease us back, but we said, "Oh, here comes the gopher." And but he claimed good health because of it. I called him up, talked to him on the phone. I says, "Hey, his name was George. George, are you still doing the raw food diet?" He says, "I sure am." This was 20 years later. He says, "Yeah, in the last 20 years, I haven't had a cold or a flu. I haven't missed a day of work due to being sick." And so, fresh fruits and vegetables, that's where you're really going to get your benefit. And so, on the other hand, things that don't help are a high-fat diet. So natural killer cells are wiped out by a high-fat diet. If you're on a low-fat diet, the natural killer cell activity is very high. I'm saying 100%. If you're on a normal fat diet, which is, normal for society, it cuts it in half. If you're on a high-fat diet, like most people who eat at fast food restaurants get, it cuts it down by nearly 80%. And so a high-fat diet, especially anything with cholesterol in your diet is going to wipe out your natural killer cells. Now, cholesterol is from, eggs and butter and milk and cheese and meat, and it suppresses the immune system. It wipes. Now look at this number here. The natural killer cells are at 1/4 their normal activity. Now keep that number in mind because we're going to show you what will boost it 4 times. But eating cholesterol makes your natural killer cells reduce, and they don't produce as much interferon either. Sugar wipes out your immune system. Here's a study done by dentists where they looked at what happens when people ate sugar to how well white cells could consume bad bacteria. If you're not eating any sugar, as in this first column here in the green, each white cell could consume 14 bad bacteria. If you ate 12 teaspoons of sugar, about the amount of sugar in one soda pop, then each white cell could only consume 5.5 bacteria. If you consume 24 teaspoons, or amount of sugar in, say, a banana split, then each white cell could only consume 1 bad bacteria. Now, you have to realize that sugar doesn't always just come in soda pop and in candy bars. In fact, if you eat a breakfast that's a glass of orange juice, a bowl of cornflakes and milk, and a piece of toast, you get about 16 teaspoons of sugar in your bloodstream very quickly. That would make a diabetic have very high blood sugar. And so the same effect, that would be like wiping out your immune system. You don't want highly processed food. The problem with that is the juice. That goes in your bloodstream really fast with sugar. White bread, that goes in your bloodstream really fast with sugar. And cornflakes and milk. So if we look at sugar as being 100, and if you take a teaspoon of sugar, it makes your blood sugar go up really fast. cornflakes and milk would be 93, meaning it would be 93% as high and as fast as pure sugar, a glycemic index of 93. And so if you're eating foods that would give a diabetic a high blood sugar, they'll give you a low immune system. What about milk? Good or bad? Going to help your immune system? No. And it doesn't. Milk drinking results in natural killer cell activity decrease. Your natural killer cells are not helped by milk. And since your natural killer cells aren't working to either fight a virus that would cause pandemic or a virus that would cause cancer, tripling milk protein intake triples cancer risk. And so you don't want milk for fighting a pandemic. Now, I mentioned eating a breakfast that included toast, which is usually for most people white bread. White bread is sort of one of those things that we use to illustrate no food value, no vitamins and minerals. And in the United States, anyway, we have this USRDA of vitamins suggesting how much you need of each vitamin. People who don't even achieve that much are shown to have depressed natural killer cells. And so we figure they have, some good sense about how much you need of each vitamin. And the best way to get it is from your food. And so you don't want to be low in any of these. If you're deficient, for example, in vitamin A, then you will have trouble producing the IgA from the lymphocytes to fight viruses. And so you want to get your vitamin A. How do I get my vitamin A? Shall I take beta-carotene pills? Shall I take palmate pills? No, the pills are actually increasing cancer. Vitamin A pills increase cancer. But if you get your vitamin A from carrots or from their natural sources, it boosts your immune system. Why? Well, carrots have, at least in one study, 273 different active forms of vitamin A. You take a pill, they isolated one. What happened to the other 272? You need all the different forms of carotenoids and carotenes and so forth so that you have a well-rounded picture. So the best way is not to find a supplement. The best way is to eat a food. And I hope that's very clear. And so where do I get my vitamin A? Well, good sources here, paprika. What's paprika? It's really dried bell pepper. But paprika is very high in vitamin A. Cayenne pepper, sweet potato, carrots, kale, spinach. Now notice at the bottom I put soybean oil 0. Why did I put soybean oil 0 at the bottom? If you're eating food that is deficient in a vitamin you need, your body will soon deplete its supply and you'll be totally malnourished, and then you'll be more likely to get the disease. You need to eat the food that will give you the nutrient you need. All right, vitamin E, same story. Vitamin E pills cause cancer, whereas vitamin E from natural sources help fight diseases. And the reason you need vitamin E is because the viruses cause a lot of problems to your tissues through inflammation. But vitamin E makes it so that that doesn't happen so bad. It's also true that viruses make it so you lose your appetite. Vitamin E keeps your appetite there. It makes it so the viruses can't do that to you. Vitamin E also lowers the inflammatory mediators, the mediators that cause inflammation, such as tumor necrosis factor. Where do I get my vitamin E? Well, how much do I need? Maybe about 30 international units. Places I can get it, sunflower seeds. You'll see sunflower seeds show up on here quite a lot. That would be a good food for fighting viruses. Almonds, flaxseed, wheat germ, olive oil, pine nuts. You get your alpha and beta pinene there too. They're sort of expensive, but... All right, folic acid. Do I want folic acid? No, I don't want folic acid. I want folate. Folic acid is the substitute. So severe folate deficiency results in immunosuppression. So I need lots of folate. If I take it in food, it's a benefit. If I take it in pills, the benefit isn't quite as good. But if I take both pills and the food, they don't help each other. In fact, they make it worse. You can't try both, according to the study I read. How much do I need? 400 micrograms. Where would I get it? And I don't want folic acid again. I want folate. And I would only get folate from food. Arrowroot, Wheat germ, peanuts, sunflower seeds there again. All right, spinach, lentils, and so forth. So eating your food that's high in the nutrients you need is the best way to get the nutrient. Now, vitamin C. And this is one of my favorite ones to talk about. You don't need megadoses. Megadoses aren't helpful. It's very popular to take megadoses, lipo, whatever, vitamin C. That's not what you want. It's an antioxidant. It reduces the symptoms of the infection. It helps reduce the damage due to cytokine storm. And it's very good at helping the immune system to avoid catching the disease. It improves other white cells like your macrophages so that they're more beneficial. Where's the best place to get my vitamin C? Food. And here we have that you need 60 milligrams. That's USRDA. I read a study, and the study compared two groups of people. One group of people were given vitamin C pills, 500 milligrams. The other group of people took a lemon and juiced it and put the juice in water and drank it. They did this for a few days, and then they checked their blood. Guess who had a lot more vitamin C in their blood? The lemon. Guess who had a lot more antioxidants in their blood? The lemon juice ones. But how much vitamin C did the laboratory say was in one lemon's lemon juice? 43 milligrams. So one group is taking a pill with supposedly 500 milligrams. It's doing them no good, or very little good. The other group is taking a natural source of lemon, and they're getting great benefits, far beyond what would be expected for how little vitamin C was there. You see, you get your best nutrients from whole foods, not from laboratory-prepared supplements. Strawberries, bell peppers, chives, red cabbage. Notice red cabbage has more than lemons or oranges. Broccoli, pineapple. And so pineapple is very good for pandemics and inflammation, and it's got bromelain, which helps reduce inflammation. And it's very good for arthritis. It's sort of a unique fruit. Not too many fruits that we get off of a bromeliad or a thing that looks like a yucca or a cactus. All right, selenium. Now we're getting into minerals. In Australia, they discovered that a lot of their cattle were getting cancer. They did tests to see what they might be deficient in. What was it? It was selenium. So we spent 5 years in Australia, and not only were the cattle taking selenium, some of our friends were going down to the animal feed store and buying gallons of sodium selenite and taking it themselves. Yeah, it's not good to be low in selenium, but where can you get selenium? I'll show you here in a minute, but first I'll tell you why you need selenium and the mechanism. You see, if you get plenty of selenium, then it boosts your natural killer cells. What's more, it makes it so that the inflammation doesn't melt down tissues like your lungs so bad. What happens when you get a pandemic, especially hemorrhagic pandemic disease like hemorrhagic fever or 1918 pandemic influenza, bird flu, whatever, it makes your lungs melt down literally. They go from having a bubbly look under a microscope where all the little air sacs are to being flat and no air sacs showing. But if you have plenty of selenium, you won't have that problem of the lungs melting down. What do we see there? What's that? Brazil nuts is your best source of selenium. But not your only source. There's also sesame seeds, pretty high, and this would probably be unhulled sesame seeds. The unhulled sesame seeds have a lot more minerals like calcium and selenium and so forth. Wheat germ, amaranth, barley, and so they say you need 100, that should be micrograms. Oh wait, it is micrograms. 70 micrograms is how much you need, and which is a very small amount. Okay, so if we look at what happened with COVID, a diet high in selenium reduced COVID cases by 10-fold. That's incredible. These studies were done in China, where they studied whole cities and what people were getting in their diets and whether or not they were selenium sufficient or not. And the cities who didn't have any selenium didn't fare well. Higher selenium levels improved the survival rate, and lower selenium levels increased the death rate. And so you don't want to be low in selenium. All right, zinc. Have you heard of the benefits of zinc for colds and flus? And you can buy zinc lozenges in a supermarket or pharmacy. And it's true, zinc helps. It's especially important for the way the antibodies work, but we call it the zinc finger. Anyway, zinc is necessary for natural killer cell activity. If you don't have enough zinc, then your natural killer cells won't work as well. How much do you need? Well, according to USRDA, you need 15 milligrams. That's basically for growth. But if you're going to boost your immune system, you probably need more like 60. And then most of the time, that's how much they give you in these zinc lozenges. But I say get it from your food. Wheat germ, pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds is the go-to for zinc, really. We often recommend pumpkin seeds. Sesame seeds, wheat bran, pine nuts, maple sugar, finally. No, don't get it all from maple sugar. That might not be healthy. A little bit too much free carbohydrate there. All right, so these pumpkin seeds. When we look at what happened with COVID, higher zinc levels reduced recovery time by 2/3. In fact, people who had plenty of zinc on board, they reduced the time to recover from COVID dramatically. If you didn't have enough zinc, your COVID lasted 24 days. If you had plenty of zinc, it only lasted 8 days, 1/3 the time. So you want plenty of zinc on board. Now let's talk about specific foods. We've been going through vitamins and minerals. Now let's just talk about certain foods and why they're beneficial. Here we have grapes. For some reason, the grapes that they seem to study are the red ones. I don't know that that's any reason that the reds are better than others, although I would think that the reds and purples and blacks are probably more nutritious than the white ones. But the grapes have something in them called resveratrol. Resveratrol is a phytochemical that boosts the immune system. It is actually a bit antiviral itself, and it makes it so that, at least in laboratories, mice had a much better survival rate from different viruses that they gave them, such as influenza. So eating lots of grapes. See, I had some grapes for breakfast. How many had grapes for breakfast? A few? All right. Yeah, grapes are good. Apples, an apple a day. Is it true? It's true. What kind of apple? Well, probably your favorite apple. If you look at their glycemic index, there's only a few points difference between a Granny Smith and a Fuji, which are at opposite ends of the glycemic scale. One's like 39 and the other one's like 32. It's like not a big deal difference, so pick whatever apple you like. And what they actually do is they give you better lung function. People who eat apples actually breathe an extra 134 milliliters of air with every breath. So I do a whole talk on lung health, especially for people who need to recover from lung diseases or have asthma or emphysema. And one of the big things we do is we have them taking apples and grapes. Yeah. And so this is a very big benefit. Another good food, superfood. Why is it a superfood? Well, it's high in, well, it's got some selenium, but it's high in sulfur. That helps the immune system. It's got, I always have a hard time with this word. It's, is it Anacin? No, allicin. Yeah, that one messes me up. Allicin. And so allicin's very good. And so in 1918, there was a group of 20 people that decided to eat garlic every day to make sure they all had at least a clove. And none of them caught the 1918 pandemic. There was a study done over in Israel in a commune. You know, a commune is where everybody lives kind of close together. This was a commune where everybody lived in one big building and did their farming together and everything. They gave half the people in the commune garlic supplement pills. That half of people got 63% fewer upper respiratory tract infections. So even being in close quarters, no social distancing, just taking garlic helped. And I always like to joke that, you eat your garlic and go around town. It helps with social distancing, right? People know to avoid you. Hi, I had my garlic. And they run the other way. Onions, similar to garlic, and they're beneficial as well. They also have quercetin, like apples. And people who take them, have you ever noticed you eat an onion and almost instantly it's on your breath? It goes to your lungs. It helps your lungs. But you can also find the same quercetin in green leafy vegetables. And we'll talk about green leafy vegetables here in a bit. Soy is very anti-inflammatory. It helps reduce the inflammation in the lungs and other tissues as a result of these viruses. And so it's beneficial for pandemics and for cancer, as we mentioned on Friday night. Turmeric is a superfood for being anti-inflammatory. And so we take advantage of its benefits both for inflammation caused by arthritis or for inflammation caused by viruses. And some people say, well, I have to take it with some other nasty concoction in order for it to absorb, like black pepper or something else. It's like, no, just take an extra bit of it. It's cheap, it's easy. If you get 10% better absorption if you eat it with something nasty, well, just eat 10% more of it and don't eat something nasty with it. So, yeah. All right, elderberry. We tried growing elderberries this year. We must not have had good pollinators. The bush grew really big, but didn't put on any fruit, so I got to figure that out. But anyway, elderberry fruit and flower extracts can inhibit the binding of COVID-19 spike protein to the ACE2 receptors. So they proved it to be very beneficial. And other good herbs. Let's talk about herbs. Astragalus. How many have heard of astragalus? That's kind of a common herb. Very good. And licorice. Licorice tastes good. It's not good if you have high blood pressure. It won't help that. It sort of makes your blood pressure go high. But for people with low blood pressure, this is a go-to. But astragalus exhibits anti-coronal activity. And I'm sort of hitting on coronavirus because that was the one that's most recent. But anyway, there's also chameleon plant. And it stimulates the lymphocytes, those B cells, to fight viruses. And then there's Chinese cedar. And it also helps fight viruses. I already mentioned making pine needle tea. And with its alpha and beta pinene. And it's not a bad tasting tea. In fact, you wouldn't even recognize, if you were blindfolded and given it as a tea and said, where'd it come from? You wouldn't guess pine. It doesn't taste, at least my pine needles didn't taste much like pine. All right, honey. If you mix it with turmeric, it's very beneficial. That's one good way to actually improve your turmeric. And it has to do with things like propolis and pollens and things like that. And honey isn't just a sweetener. It has medicinal properties that are beneficial. Plant-based diet. Compared with omnivores and vegetarians, compared with omnivores, vegans had significantly higher blood levels of important vitamins, vitamin A, C, and E. So if you're eating a good diet, your blood will reflect that. And vegetarians' natural killer cell activity was twice that of omnivores. Omnivores meaning people who eat meat as well as fruits and vegetables. Now, one of the problems with the pandemics, both 1918, Spanish influenza, and COVID, was what it did to your blood. And in this era, people who took the vaccine, what it did to the blood. And that is, it made the blood so that it clotted too easy. Initially, sometimes it caused overbleeding, and that was the hemorrhagic part of Spanish influenza. But then you got a backlash with hypercoagulability. And for people taking the vaccine for COVID, a lot of hypercoagulability. So you need some natural blood-thinning alternatives. Now, I'll just say, if you go to my website, you can download a handout for this lecture with all these in it, because it's going to be a list. But pineapple, with its vitamin C and bromelain, it's very fibrinolytic. It breaks down clots. It makes it so the blood flows better. So when I have somebody coming to me with long COVID or post-vaccine syndrome, then I have them getting lots of pineapple. Grapefruit improves the blood's fluidity, so it flows better. And so that's very important. Turmeric, garlic, and sesame seeds thin the blood. Those are very helpful. Herbs that help are like Chervil. And you see little numbers there? Instead of putting a reference at the bottom of my screen there, those are, and if you go to my paper, those will be references for each one of these from research done on these. Good hydration assures a thinner blood. Drinking plenty of water. How much water do I need? For men, nearly a gallon or 3.7 liters. For women, 2.7 liters. That includes what water you get in your food, so you don't have to drink all of that. But I usually tell people drink 3 liters a day, no matter what. Avoid fried foods, fatty foods. They thicken the blood. They make it so it coagulates and makes it so you're more likely to clot up. Avoid refined foods, which lack things like fiber. You want to avoid sugar, white flour products, white rice. They all thicken the blood. The higher your percentage of your diet that you eat as fresh fruits and vegetables, the more thin your blood will be, at least to within normal limits. And you want to avoid inflammatory foods. What are inflammatory foods? Foods that increase inflammation. Fermented foods. Fermented foods. What is a fermented food? Now, have you heard of MRSA? Who's heard of MRSA? A couple of you. It's a dangerous bacteria you get in the hospital. And if you get it, it might cause a skin infection, erysipelas or a big cellulitis. If I get a cellulitis from a bacteria, am I healthy or am I sick? I'm sick. Well, what if my vegetables or my milk product got an infection from a bacteria? Is it healthy or is it sick? It's sick. So fermented food is sick food. It's got an infection. And if I'm eating food that has an infection, is it going to help me avoid infections or give me more likelihood that I'll get an infection? More likelihood that I'll get an infection. I don't want sick food. I want healthy food. And so I want to avoid fermented foods like vinegar, soy sauce, cheese, wine. I also want to avoid fried foods that greatly increase inflammation. Those all increase the likelihood that you'll clot up, that you'll be sicker from the pandemic. Well, what kind of diet have we been talking about? It's the Bible diet, isn't it? The original diet, God's diet from Genesis, Creator's diet, fruits, grains, nuts, seeds, vegetables. Well, let's talk about what to avoid a bit. Abstemiousness, that's one of those 8 natural doctors. People who smoke, do you think they have more flus or less flus? More flus. Definitely. They're more likely to catch the flu and more likely to miss work because of it. How about alcohol? Does alcohol help your immune system? No, it poisons the natural killer cells. It makes it so they're suppressed. And if I mix the two, it's even worse. The effect is not just additive, it's multiplied. Much worse than just one or the other by themselves. Fermentation, and so everything from cheese to sauerkraut, and people always have their favorite fermented food. Did you know vanilla is a fermented food? Did you know that calamansi olives are a fermented food? A lot of fermented foods that are sold on the market, and they don't help health. But here we have chocolates fermented, vanilla's fermented, mushrooms, brown rice syrup, sour cream, yogurt, soy sauce, vinegar, all kinds of things. All right, another thing that doesn't help is gaining extra weight. For COVID, all those fat cells all had receptors for COVID, ACE2 receptors. And so the heavier you were, the more receptors you had, the sicker you got. And much more likely to die of the pandemic. Much more likely to have inflammation. On the other hand, eating less food. Now, what did we say happened when you ate cholesterol? What happened to your natural killer cells? You remember the numbers? When you had cholesterol in your diet, it reduced the activity of natural killer cells to 1/4. 1/4 their normal activity. How can I fix that? Look at this. 60% dietary restriction increased natural killer cell numbers 4-fold, 4 times, and their activity 2-fold. We already said that vegetarians had twice the activity, so that makes sense. And so eating less calories. So what is she eating? A few cucumbers. Are cucumbers good? Yes, they're high in sulfur. They boost the immune system. Would that have a lot of calories? No. Could I eat as much as I wanted? Yeah. How's that compared to Snickers bars? Snickers bars have lots of calories, poor nutrition. I won't be restricting calories. So the way to restrict calories is just to eat food that doesn't have a lot of calories but has lots of nutrition. We call this nutritionally dense without being calorie dense. Fasting is beneficial. In fact, for people whose immune system is totally deranged, fasting 3 days, a water-only fast, has been shown to reset the immune system. It's good for people who have an autoimmune disease. It's good for people trying to boost their immune system. It's good for people who want to clean out the system and protects the stem cells that are making white cells, reduces inflammation. How about water? I've already mentioned how much you need, but when the place we find that studies are done on water is in nursing homes. And when those old people get dehydrated, everything goes wrong, including they're more likely to catch flus and colds and infections, and wounds don't heal well. So drinking plenty of water is very important. All right. Now this is an important aspect of water that goes beyond drinking it, and that is hydrotherapy. This was Dr. Rubel, who looked at 10 Adventist sanitariums in 1919, after the pandemic of 1918, and he compared what happened in the sanitariums to what happened to people who did hydrotherapy at home, and compared that to what happened in the government hospitals, the best of the government hospitals, which were the Army hospitals. If you came down with a Spanish influenza in 1918, and you went to the Army hospital, you had a 17% chance of getting pneumonia and a 7% chance of dying. If you did home hydrotherapy like fomentations, then you about cut your risk of pneumonia in half from going to the hospital, and you about almost cut in half your death rate. If you went to one of the sanitariums where there's plenty of people running around to do hot and cold treatments on you and do all kinds of therapies, then you only had a 1% chance of pneumonia and a 0.5% chance of dying. Kellogg in Battle Creek, which wouldn't be included in this study, claimed he didn't lose a single patient to Spanish influenza in 1918. And so your hydrotherapy, very beneficial for fighting viruses. Well, maybe you don't have a sanitarium, but what can you do at home? For me, the thing I like to do, if I start getting a bug of any kind, probably a bug is unidentified, is to go to the shower and do hot and cold showers. Now, there's several different ways you can do hot and cold showers to boost your immune system. You can simply go by the clock or your watch, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold. I usually have people do it 3 times and end. And that would be the basic, simplest, most rudimentary thing you could do. What that does is it raises your white count dramatically. The natural killer cells and the B cells and everybody else, they're sitting around a lot. They tend to be on the walls of the blood vessels just sitting there. You do this hot and cold thing, they jump off the walls and get in the bloodstream and start looking to see what's happening. You might send your white count up to 40,000. If you went and got your blood tested at that point, the doctor would be checking you for leukemia. But you wouldn't have leukemia, you'd just be boosting your immune system. The next step to the hot and cold shower that goes beyond what I just said of just timing it, and this is what I like to do, is get in the shower, turn it as hot as you can stand, even hotter than you can stand, so hot that you have to keep doing the rotisserie thing. Keep moving around so you don't get too hot. Do that until you feel like your temperature is rising. How would you know if your temperature is rising? Well, the first couple times you can keep a thermometer in your mouth. I did that. So I kind of have a distinct feeling that I know when my temperature is going up. It takes probably 10, 15 minutes for the first round, and your temperature goes up. And then run it cold for 1 minute, and then do it a second time. Second time, it won't take near as long to get your temperature to bounce up. And then run cold until you know you've had enough cold, which might be more than a minute. At that point, you'll love the cold because boosting your temperature that way makes you feel like you really want some cold water. And that will really make your white count go up. Whenever I've done that, when I thought I was coming down with the flu or cold or whatever, next day, I'm over it. It's like no more symptoms. It's just really beneficial. And then go to bed for a half hour or for the night, usually for the night. And it always helps after a hydrotherapy treatment to take at least a 20-minute, nap. All right, now that's hot and cold. Other things you can do to boost the immune system with water is just do a cool sponge bath or cool bath. And, Kellogg, who was famous for his hydrotherapy, didn't talk a lot about hot baths. He just talked about cool and tepid baths and different ways of taking them. And people who take a cool bath actually boost their immune system. They did a study up in Alaska on military recruits, and they put them in a cool bath for a given amount of time, which for them was 64 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure what that would be Celsius, but probably somewhere around 18 degrees Celsius, I'm guessing. Then, this was a cool bath, and then they sent them out on a march. And the ones that took the cool bath, their immune system was ready for anything that would come in. They were better able to handle the weather, less likely to get colds, flus, and anything else related to an infectious disease. So cool baths boost the immune system and are beneficial. Now, for people who have a pandemic virus, one of the best ways to treat a virus is with a fever bath. Viruses don't handle the heat like you can handle the heat. And so we use this for cancer, which is often viruses. We use it for other things like Lyme's disease, fever baths. But it was especially helpful for COVID. Fever baths were very much the thing to do. And in fact, so much so that if you didn't have anybody to help you and didn't have any fever bath to do, if you just went and got in your car and turned on the heater and sat there till you got a good sauna and felt like your temperature went up, it was benefit. Anything to raise your temperature, it makes your immune system more active to fight viruses. And, well, that's why your body develops a fever anyways, to make your immune system more active to fight things. And you're helping it by, artificially raising the temperature. So we had some friends that also just did hot and cold for the COVID. They would have a patient come in at their little lifestyle center with COVID, and they would do nonstop hot and cold for 2 hours on them. And they would say at the end of 2 hours, they were so much better. Just, hot and cold, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, constantly. Keep it coming. And 2 hours. Straight. And no, nonstop. And, yeah. All right, charcoal. How many of you use charcoal? And you can buy it as powder, you can buy it as granular, you can buy it as capsules and tablets. It binds viruses if it gets to them. So a good thing to do is drink some of it in water. I mean, if you really want to get on top of this thing, you put a couple spoons of activated charcoal in a glass of water. For me, if I take much more than a teaspoon of activated charcoal powder, it'll make me constipated. So I put a little psyllium husk powder with it too. And so if I was coming down with something and I wanted to treat it, I might put a tablespoon of activated charcoal powder in I usually use a glass jar with it, so I can put a lid on and shake it once I get the ingredients in there. Otherwise, it kind of makes a mess. Or you can use a spoon in a glass. But I'll put a tablespoon of charcoal powder and a teaspoon of psyllium husk powder, and then I'll shake it up, and then I don't just drink it right away. I let it set for 10 minutes. Why do I let it set for 10 minutes? Charcoal is a bit hydrophobic. And if I let it set for 10 minutes, then it gets well wetted. It's pore wetting. I mean, its surface tension comes down. And that way, I get a better bond between the charcoal and viruses, charcoal and tissues, charcoal and whatever. And so that's one of the things you can do to make sure your charcoal is the most effective. Extracting its virtue, as we're told.
You're not talking about just drinking a slurry. You're talking about stirring it up and drinking it now and then after the 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I would re-slurry it too. I would mix it back up before I drink it. There's charcoal poultices. So for pandemics in 1918, people went into a major lung meltdown. And with some of the indications of the next pandemic, it could be hemorrhagic fever with lung meltdown. And so one of the best things you can do is put a charcoal poultice over the entire chest to pull out the inflammation. Put the patient to bed and put a charcoal poultice over their entire, maybe even front and back, especially if they're, going into major lung meltdown and dying. Charcoal poultice front and back. And so there's different ways of making it. You can make it with, there's several, charcoal as a powder isn't as effective, at least for skin contact, as a powder as it would be if it is bound with something. In my personal experience, I like flaxseed as the binder, and I like the flaxseed ground to make my charcoal poultices. Some people just throw the flax seeds in whole. It works, but then you have these little, fish egg things running around of seeds. But so I'll take a saucepan, put in 1 cup of water in the saucepan, and then I'll heat it up. I'll put in 3 tablespoons of activated charcoal powder, and then I'll put in 3 tablespoons of the ground flax, and then I'll mix it and bring it to a boil, and then let it cool, and it'll be this jelly. It won't dry out that way. It won't be powder and get all over my everything. And for my own experience, when I've had injuries, at least especially injuries, and I've tried different charcoal poulticing materials, I found the flaxseed to add to the benefit of the charcoal, to help reduce pain and inflammation and soreness faster than using psyllium husk powder or anything else. But you can use anything you use in your kitchen to thicken things to make your charcoal poultice. Some people use oatmeal. Some people use cornstarch. I mean, the idea is just to bind it together so it isn't a powder floating off. And so then for the person that's going into hemorrhagic fever and lungs melting down, you might just stick the stuff straight on the chest. Just figure you're going to have to peel it off later. That is messy, but it's going to be the most effective that way. But if you don't like that messiness, then you can, like he's doing here, put it on a paper towel, and then that way you'll put a paper towel on both sides of your charcoal poultice and make the one paper towel wet and put that against the skin. So you have a water bond between the skin and the charcoal. And that works. It works. And then put it on, usually overnight. Is there any time I wouldn't do it all overnight, or that I want to change it more frequently? If you got a snake bite, you might want to change it every 10 minutes with a new one initially, just because of, you're wanting to get the stuff out as fast as possible, and the fresher the charcoal poultice, the more it's going to pull, and over time it's going to quit pulling so fast. But on a sick patient like that, which you're just putting to bed, you can do it for cancer, you can do it for inflammation, we do it for kidney failure. But anyway, charcoal's a whole other topic, but charcoal poultice for the lungs in these pandemics. For the 1918 Spanish influenza, their brains went into meltdown with major cytokine storm. You can do a charcoal poultice over the brain. If they're dying, they're not going to care about their hair, shave their hair out off and put a big poultice over the top of their head. Their lungs melted down, they're spitting, coughing up blood. Charcoal poultice over the, they threw up blood and even blood coming out the other end. Charcoal by mouth. Charcoal stops bleeding. And so taking charcoal by mouth, taking charcoal as an enema, the same solution that we talked about drinking, can be useful. Now, does EMF help? No. In fact, pretty good indication that they use EMF to turn on viruses. At least in studies, they can take a virus and activate it with EMF, with radio waves. So we have all these different devices we have, and they're electronic waves, and you certainly don't want to be in a high EMF area. Where does EMF come from? Well, it comes from fluorescent lights, and it comes from cell phones and electric meters that are digital. It comes from cell phone towers. It comes from electrical wiring in the houses. EMF comes in your cars. Cars are really high EMF sources. And in fact, when you eat refined foods like oil and sugar, it makes all your little red blood cells stick together and their oxygen carry capacity goes down. You sit in front of your computer for 10, 15 minutes, the EMF will do the same thing to your blood. It'll cause rouleau, all the little red blood cells sticking together, and your oxygen level goes down. Best thing to do is have a monitor for your computer that's far away, or your computer far away, and have a wired keyboard and mouse closer to you, and stay away from those devices. You can get a little meter that'll tell you how much EMF's coming off. You can even download an app on some cell phones that will monitor your EMF levels. All right, now let's get into the social aspects. Loving, trusting relationships. Helpful or not helpful? Helpful. People who have loving, trusting relationships. It's through the mechanism of oxytocin. Oh, for EMF? Yes, how about the benefits of iodine? Iodine is very beneficial. If you're low in it, you're in trouble. The benefits of iodine is that it helps to reduce inflammation. It helps get rid of other toxic elements that make your immune system worse, such as fluoride and chloride. If you're insufficient in it, then your thyroid goes down. When your thyroid goes down, so does your immune system. So you definitely want to be sufficient or have enough iodine. Most people in this modern age with lots of insults from fluoride and chloride and MSG and EMF would probably do well to take about 12 milligrams of iodine a day. The easiest way to get that is through Lugol's solution, which is a 5% potassium iodide, and taking 2 drops a day. So yes, does that answer your question? Yes, you're welcome. All right, so oxytocin is there. It helps to boost your immune system, helps your immune system do surveillance for viruses, and it can block viral invasion. It suppresses cytokine storm. It reverses the decrease in lymphocytes caused by some of these viruses, and it makes it so you don't end up in multi-organ failure. And so the more oxytocin you have, the more likely you are to survive, and people who have more loving relationships have higher oxytocin levels. So have you heard that you need several 8-second hugs a day? Well, there you go. You have to get your immune-boosting hug every day. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. Very good. How about trust in divine power? And people who get depressed, their immune system goes down. Depression doesn't help you to live longer. Stress makes it so you're more likely to get respiratory tract infections. People under more stress, it wipes out their natural killers and their IgA levels. And people with more stress end up with more respiratory tract infections. Somebody who gets angry and frustrated for 5 minutes, it lowers their IgA levels for 5 hours. Doesn't that just make you angry? No, better not, right? Okay, trust in divine power. A life lived to bless others. I keep stressing this because it's so important. People who help others live longer, they have less diseases when they're helping their friends, their relatives, their spouses. People who just receive support, it isn't so beneficial. It's more blessed to give than to receive. This is hugely important. So what do I do if everybody's getting the pandemic and I'm scared and I'm worried and am I going to get it too? Do I hide in my house or do I go help them? Pray, eat your good diet, and go help them. And we had friends that were around others that had, we were way out in the middle of nowhere, nobody was getting around us, but we had friends that lived near the town and there was people getting it and they went in and helped them and they never got it. Never got the pandemic. So I showed you the slide the other day, but people are depressed, they have bipolar, they have anxiety, they have multiple sclerosis, neuropathy, and tremors, heart disease, heart failure, and stroke. Here's the solution. The pleasure of doing good to others imparts a glow to the feelings which flashes through the nerves, quickens the circulation of blood, and induces mental and physical health. All right, we've talked about the 8 natural doctors. You see how the 8 natural doctors help keep you from a pandemic? How they keep you from getting sick when everybody else is dying? Does it all make sense? All right. Let's see now. If you go to my website, Northern Lights Health Education, sorry, somehow on that computer it changed the lettering from white to black so you can't see it, but northernlightshealtheducation.com. And you can download a handout for this lecture with all the information under presentation handouts or written materials. And all right, and this has been Pandemics Today. Also, you can go on there under presentation handouts and download our book as a PDF on the same page at the bottom of the page. Any questions? Yes.